Hello, everyone. It's another Music for Your Inbox artist chat. And today we're going to be talking with the creator of one of our sound films called Possessed by Light. The creator is Cristina Lord, who is a composer, electronic musician, pianist. And we're just going to chat with her about how she made her film, what her art practice is like. So I'm going to invite her now, and we will start our conversation.
Hi,
Hello.
welcome. I wanted to kind of start, if you would be cool with it. You have a really interesting practice that spans kind of all of these modes, piano and electronic music and composing. How did you kind of come to these different practices and what does it look like
That's
for
a great
you
question.
today?
I started off as a pianist, learning how to perform and, then I started getting into composing, and at first with composing it was, all just acoustic music. But I eventually started to get really enamored with this whole world of electronics, and I think just as a composer there's something really appealing about this world because there is an amount of control that you can have with it, and maybe it's just the perfectionist in me that really likes that aspect. Just being able to, play with sounds in a really interesting, controlled, precise way, but also to exploring types of sound worlds that aren't possible acoustically. Sound design and just playing with different timbral qualities and doing things that would be kind of too technically demanding for a human to play, right? So that also started to really appeal to me. So, it just sort of came naturally, and over time it's now just become a core part of my artistic practice is experimenting with electronics. And but I also really love, bringing in the human aspects and playing, experimenting with that interplay between human performance and electronics, and that world where those two intersect is super fascinating and beautiful to me. It's kind of I don't know, to me it feels it's almost like an extended technique for, human performance, being able to do interesting things with processing or, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you bring up kind of this idea of intersection between live and acoustic. I also kind of read, when I was looking up things, about you have this other intersection you play with, or you describe a lot this intersection between classical world and a popular music aesthetic. Can you talk about how that functions for you and these it seems like there's a lot of in between kind of
Oh,
overlapping
totally.
spaces you're
Yeah, no,
navigating.
so you hit it on the head. I love those intersections so much. I just feel like there's always a really interesting space there to explore. But yeah, so something else, like you mentioned, I'm really interested in is the intersection between popular music and classical music. And I think it's just, I know I'm definitely not alone in that. There's so many composers that love exploring that intersection. And I think for me, it's kind of just a product of the world we live in. We're constantly hearing all different types of music. And for me, it's hard for me to ignore what's going on in the popular music world. And it's hard for me to always put that aside when I'm exploring more experimental things. And so I've just found that there's a really interesting intersection between the two. But I've played with that in multiple ways. So it might be, for example, exploring forms that are more common in popular music, for example, really short pieces, 2-minute pieces, but then having them be more through composed instead of a verse chorus structure, right? So that's one example, but also just things types of instrumentation, and I also tend to explore things that are kind of more, I guess, beat centered in a way that is more akin to what we hear in popular music. Not that classical music isn't beat centered, but I guess having a very strong sense of beat as being like a core aspect of the music is something that I like to explore a lot. So yeah, I don't know. I like to play with different ways that intersection can happen. So yeah, in general, interdisciplinary things and those intersections between different artistic practices as well is something that is super fun to explore. So I look forward to exploring it more. Yeah.
Well, you said something really interesting that maybe we could talk a little bit more. It was like you said you found it difficult to keep kind of your pop influences separate from your classical. Did you feel like that was something you needed to do? Like strong, clear divide. I have these two pieces of myself. And what helped you, if anything, kind of move past that sense of there being a hard line?
That's a great question. So I think something that actually, weirdly enough, helped me with this was lately in the past few years, I've actually been exploring writing more just like traditional pop music, because for so long I've been more composing in the classical canon, but then being really interested in the intersection. But I felt like I had to then go to the other extreme to find where the two really met. So yeah, so I would say that has actually helped me a lot in finding that. But it's still something I feel like I'm just starting to explore this, to be honest. So we'll see what happens. What happens in the future, but
yeah. I really relate to the like needing a kind of pendulum piece of things before like some sense of the center is like even possible, like being in the classical world, being in the pop world, and then eventually you're like, oh,
exactly,
yeah, better now.
Right, because I feel like where I really want to be is in that middle, but I didn't know where the middle was, right? Until, like you said, the pendulum, you have to kind of find the ends of the spectrum, and then then you can find the middle. Yeah.
That's really, I can relate a lot. So I was also wondering, so then I'm going to take a minute and describe Possessed by Light, and then you can kind of add, but I'm going to take a stab just because no one has seen it yet, which is very exciting. Possessed by Light is the sound film that we'll be releasing of yours alongside a sound film by Julie Herndon. And that's you have to get tickets by the 15th, but that will come out on the 20th of this month into your inboxes. So I'm going to take a stab at describing it. When I first saw it, it's a lot of highly processed visuals that you can't always tell what the source is, but then you kind of move in and out of revealing what the source is. And a lot of the source materials are these really interesting kind of links to light, like jellyfish, which are both like bioluminescent and transparent, and in water that like refracts and reflects the light in interesting ways, like a window that has kind of a warbly glass effect, and you've turned on its side to kind of really disorient us and like relate us to this idea of peering through and seeing things, the reflection on water. And so you have these really interesting source materials that are already really kind of like tugging at what you might kind of assume light is. Like light illuminates things, right? But it also does all these other things that you're pointing to. But then you take these sources and you really stretch them at their kind of like elemental properties, like saturation, which is a form of light, and the different color channels, and like squishing and expanding and all of these different things. And it creates this kind of beautiful collage that is both kind of literally like possessed by light, very bright and beautiful and colorful, but also has these kind of underlying kind of investigations about like what light can do and what it is. So that is my kind of my stab at explaining it for no one who has seen it yet. And if I've missed anything,
that was
jump
great.
in.
Yeah, thank you so much for that description. Yeah, I think that was very well said and goes through what I was thinking. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think sometimes you're
Yeah.
a different person to describe your work than your own self. Like as someone who has to describe my own work, I'd rather someone else try it. So having described it, what I would love for you to talk about though is like, why did you start making this piece, and like what were you kind of interested in doing with it? I know there's the result, but like what was the journey
Great
like
question.
for
So, starting out, I kind of didn't know what it was. So usually when I'm writing, it's rare that I have a concrete idea to begin with. I usually just sort of start playing with things until I find what it is and then, work on that. But the way that this started was with the music portion. And I was getting really into just like vocal processing at the time. So I wanted to I guess it started as an experiment in just playing with vocal processing. But what I ended up getting into with it was this idea of how I could make the voice feel like it was different things. So basically like transfiguration of the voice. So, for example, like a really simple aspect would be stretching out, like slowing down the vocals so slow that it feels like this drone that doesn't even sound like voice anymore. It just sounds like a synth, but it's not. It's just my voice. And then also like chopping up the vocals in really erratic ways to make it feel more like textural. And so I got really into this idea of just like transfiguration, making something become like warping something into something else. And then I started layering other aspects of sound within that realm. So there's like sounds of rain, for example, that are warped in different ways. So basically the idea started forming of transfiguration, warping something into something else. And then I wanted to, it just felt very visual to me. So I wanted to play around with adding visuals to it. So then I started thinking about how I could use the same concept in the visual realm of making film warp into something else. So, it started off as just me taking videos of things that I thought looked interesting, like a jellyfish, right? And then just processing the video in different ways to like warp it. So like you mentioned, like saturation or creating these like fractals, many copies of the video, but very small, so it starts to look like pixelated. And then just over time, I started to just notice how present this idea of light was, because it was, so colorful, so bright. And I also felt that light fit within this overall theme of transfiguration as well, because I feel like light is so dependent on, like light has these transformative properties too, depending on, what the light is, something can look totally different. So I felt that it tied into the overall sort of concept of what was going on. So that's basically how the piece evolved, just slowly over time.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, and I'm glad you talked more about the sound. I was so hyper focused on the visuals. I'm glad you really talked about that too, and it reminds me to kind of mention that that's really special about this film is it did start often in like the film worlds. You have the visuals and then you score them, but this was a score that got visualized, which is a really interesting way to kind of flip that script. So yeah, thanks for describing it. I know also because we have a lot of like really great nerdy people who are going to possibly, who are following and are going to watch this, and I'd love for you to talk about like what is the equipment you're using? What are the kind of software? Because it really feels so stretched, like how are you, what are some of the
Yeah,
tools you're
so
using to achieve
for
this?
the music portion, I was using a combination of Logic and Ableton. I was doing lots of like the arrangement and mixing stuff in Logic, but I was playing around with time warping things in Ableton. So I was just going back and forth with those. The video itself, I was using Jitter from, like maximum speed Jitter, but I'm not super savvy with Jitter, so I was using, if anyone is like a Max person, they'll know what I'm talking about, but there are these objects that are called like Visi objects that they are kind of like pre-coded that do certain things, like one might like saturate or like one might pixelate. So I use these different objects, and then what I would do is I would listen to the music and then in real time record changes with the settings that I felt matched what was what was going on with the music. And then I had these various recordings that I made from processing the video in real time, and then I just used basic like iMovie to to edit it all together. But yeah, like you said, I really was interested in this idea of having music score film instead of the other way around, and really have the visuals that we're seeing augment what we're hearing in the music. So with all the editing that I did, I timed things according to what was happening in the music. And you guys gave me amazing feedback too in helping with some of those timing things and bringing the piece to what it is now. So I'm really, really thankful for all of your feedback in the process as well.
That was really, really fun from us. So because you submitted the film to us through our kind of like portal, and we were really excited about it, and it was so generous and really fun to get to like be a part of the iterations that got kind of to the final version that is magical, and I'm really excited for you.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, that means a lot. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah. I figured I want to also kind of describe for people watching, there's another film that will be paired with your piece called A Long Postlude by Julie Herndon. She also submitted that through our portal, but it was 6 minutes long, which doesn't kind of reach what our length is for releases. And then when you submitted yours, we realized there was this kind of match made in heaven where both pieces are very, very directly inspired by light, but take super different approaches on it, which is the sweet spot for us. So in Julie's piece, she has a soloist light bulb surrounded with a backdrop of kind of a choir of light bulbs. And they light in the kind of recitation and a kind of choral style singing of texts from Alexander Graham Bell's invention of the photophone, which is a way to transcribe light into sound, and also Latter-day Saint prophecies about light and the way it kind of impacts spirituality. So two people who were looking to light as a way of like seeing and shaping their understanding of spirituality and the world around them. So it's really neat to get to kind of see this like kind of philosophical, concrete, but very like beautiful and also very vocal, which is similar to yours view on light, and then transition into this kind of elemental, refractive, transformative, and more digital version of light that you explored. So it's really it's a really exciting double feature that we're really
super
really
cool. Yeah, no, I feel honored to be paired with her amazing film. It's really, really interesting. So yeah, and like you said, I think the two complement each other really well. They're different sides of the same coin. So
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up,
Oh,
or something I've missed?
dang, I think we covered kind of everything I would want to say. I don't want to give too much away, so but
Yeah. I think it will be very surprising to people, even with our many words about it. Words never
well, thank you
get
so
measure up,
much
so.
for having me. Yeah, this was
Really
this was
enjoyed
really
it.
fun. It's good to talk with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone wants to get tickets to see these films, just go to our website, musicforyourinbox.com. Sales close on the 15th, and the video will come to you on the 20th of this
Thank you
month.
so much.
Thank you
Yeah, looking
again.
forward to it. Okay.
All
Bye.
right.